And on this week's In Focus session, we will be talking about some of the biggest learnings actually that I made on the immersion that I went off, the coaching retreat that I went on last week, which was hosted by Ankush, who is an amazing coach who joined me on the podcast just a few weeks ago. If you haven't listened to that episode, I would highly recommend that you go and listen to it after this one, because it's really powerful. And I thought what I would do today is take you through, I've got my notebook here, some of the learnings that I made whilst on the retreat and the immersion, because it was such a powerful experience. It was out of London, there was 12 guys plus Ankush, and it was just a really deep coaching experience based around the inside out understanding of life, that our existence and our experience of life is entirely psychological, i.e. our thinking is what creates the feelings that we have, and the feelings therefore create the reality and the experience that we have. So it was a really deep dive on that. We had 6 days of coaching. We had some guest sessions with a few speakers, and we covered some really deep topics, everything from to sex, relationships, family, money, judgment. There was so much stuff that came out of it. And I really wanted to share some of the personal learnings that I took from it. But what I would love to invite you to do is to listen to these learnings. These are just my learnings, but see how they resonate with you. See what you take from them. See how they resonate with you in your own life, because that's what's going to really create a shift for you. That's really what's going to create an impact for you, by trying to understand and see the learnings that you can take from this episode. And what I'd love you to do is once you've listened to this episode, to hit me up on Instagram at @IamAlexManzi, shoot me a DM and let me know what's resonated with you most about this episode, because it's great to listen to the podcast. It's great to read books and stuff like that, but those things can't talk back to you. So what I'd like you to do is to hit me up with your learnings and let's have a conversation about it. I'd love to see how I can help you further those learnings, or if there's any other podcasts or stuff that I can recommend that will help further those learnings, then I'd love to do that. But to start with, I want to tell you a funny story. So I actually went to record this episode. So I've tried to record it twice. I'll come on to the second one in just a moment. But the first time I tried to record it was a few days after the immersion, because I was like, yeah, I'm pumped up. I really want to share my learnings. There's so much stuff that I took from it. I want to share as much as possible. And what happened was 2 days after the immersion, I was exhausted, because it was mentally, it was quite intense. Although it was a very slow pace and it was very calm, and there was a lot that I got from it. It was also quite mentally intense. And the 2 days after the immersion, I was exhausted. My brain was just so tired. And I jumped straight back into work. So I was like, yeah, right, I want to share these learnings with my clients and, on the podcast and stuff like that. And what happened was I sat down to record this episode, and I couldn't even make sense of my own learnings. I was just repeating myself and going around in circles. So I stopped the recording after about 10 minutes. I was like, right, no, I definitely need to take some time out. So I took the rest of the week off, Thursday through to Sunday, had 4 days to just relax, chill, hung out with my mates, hung out with my girlfriend and stuff. And I'm feeling so much better for it. So one of the learnings that I've taken away from the immersion is the importance of giving yourself space when you're learning things, when you're taking on information, when there's shifts occurring for you, is allowing yourself the time to really soak them in and download them. Because what I didn't do was exactly that. I tried to just take the learnings and want to share them straight away. And it just meant that I was really exhausted and trying to share through the tiredness, if that makes sense, through the exhaustion. But giving myself the time off to really soak in the learnings, let myself rest and recover, recharge my energy, has really helped me, which is why we're sitting down to record this episode today. And then the second time I tried to record this episode was literally about an hour ago. And it kind of brings me really interestingly onto the first point that I wanted to bring up from my notebook, which was that something that I wrote down was adversity cannot cause distress in your life. And that's because adversity is basically something outside of us, right? So a thing or a situation or an experience that we have. And the distress comes through our thinking about the adversity, right? So I'll give you an example. So an hour ago, I sat down to record this episode, recorded a really good episode. I'm not going to lie, it was a really good episode. I was really buzzing with it. And then when I was sort of downloading everything after the footage and the audio, and I stopped the audio recording, although I'd stopped it, there was still a red, like a red thing to say that it was still recording. So I was like, okay, I'll give it a couple minutes, maybe it's still processing. And it basically kept doing the same thing. So I was like, okay, this is strange. And then I basically pressed refresh on the app that I use, and it deleted the entire recording. So I was like, oh, damn, that's really annoying. And it was funny because, like, in that moment, right, that's some sort of adversity. That's a situation that's happened where the audio hasn't recorded. I recorded this wicked episode. And in that moment, it could have gone two ways, right? The first way could have been like, oh, I'm such an idiot. Like, why didn't I check the recording was working? Why didn't I check the equipment? Like, oh, that was such a good episode. I'm never going to be able to record it as good the second time. Like, and, you know, there were so many negative, you know, in inverted commas, negative thoughts that popped up around the situation that I could have clung onto and hung onto and created a negative experience out of the adversity, out of the situation. And that would have caused me distress because I would have been stressed, I would have been frustrated, I would have been annoyed, I would have been angry with myself. There would have been so much that would have happened, and it would have probably ruined the next half an hour or hour of my day, or even the afternoon, right? So that's one way it could have gone. The other way that it could have gone, which is the way it's gone, is that I kind of just laughed at it. I was like, oh, it's a bit annoying. Yes, okay, like, it's a really good episode, and, you know, I've lost the recording, but whatever, like, but let's carry on. Like, what can I do? Like, what can I learn from this? First of all, I can learn to check everything before I hit record to make sure it's actually working properly. And secondly, like, I can just sit down and record it again a bit later on. So I went and had some lunch, and then I sat back down to record this episode, and here we are. And this is the difference, right, between adversity and distress. It's like the thing that happened, which is the recording, the audio not recording properly, didn't mean that I needed to be distressed about it, right? Yes, it's very annoying. Yes, there was some frustration there. Yes, like, I was a little bit angry or whatever. But it doesn't mean that I needed to create an experience for the rest of my day that looked like that, right? Because to me, it's like there's no point hanging on to the negative feeling, because that feeling, that experience doesn't become useful for me, right? What was useful was to put it aside, learn from it, and let's record again. And here we are, right? And I wrote something down around this topic in my notebook that said, there is nothing in negativity that has the power to keep you thinking about it, right? There's nothing in negativity that has the power to keep you thinking about it. The only thing that can keep negativity alive, or a negative situation alive, is your thinking about the situation, making it more of a negative, right? Because a situation happens, it's gone, right? It's in the past. From the moment it happens to the moment it ends, is now in the past. And we only keep that alive through our own thinking. Was if you don't cling on to those negative feelings or that negative thought, right? The feeling goes with it, right? The feeling dissipates with the situation, with the event. It becomes the past. Like, for me, I was annoyed. Yeah, I was annoyed. I was a bit pissed off that the recording didn't work, but I just let that go, and I managed to, like, clear my thinking around it by letting it go. Didn't have to do anything to clear my thinking. I just let go of the idea that it was annoying, and it was something that's happened. I let it go, and I was able to return to a centered place, which has allowed me to sit down and record this episode again. So I think that's a really interesting point, because this sort of happens all the time. And we have this misunderstanding that because something outside of us has happened that could be seen as a negative, we have to feel a certain type of way about it. We have to be stressed or frustrated or angry or annoyed or whatever, but we don't. It's only our thinking that keeps that thing alive. And this kind of brings me on to the second thing that I wanted to talk about, right? And I think it's a really important topic around this time of year, because we're well into December. New Year's is approaching. People are starting to write up their New Year's resolutions and what are the things they want to get out of next year in the next 12 months, etc. I'm doing the same. And one day on the Immersion, we had this really powerful conversation around the difference between commitments and intentions, right? And there's a clear difference between the two, because a commitment is something that you're in action with. A commitment is something that you're either in or you're out. There's no sort of gray area. There's no middle ground. It's something that basically, once you've committed to it, it's done. It's done, right? Where on the other hand, an intention is kind of like a wish. It's kind of like the sort of thing that you say, oh, I want to do this, or I would like to do that, or I'm going to try to do that. Right? You're intending to do it, but you're not really committed to doing it, right? Because the difference is, like, when you're committed to doing something, you put a system in place to ensure that it gets done, to ensure the outcome, right? And I'll give you an example of that. Like, I recently just sold my car, and if it was just an intention, I could have said, right, I'm going to sell my car. I'll put a little sign in the back window that says for sale, put the price, put my phone number, and I'll wait for someone to phone me, right? Might have happened, it might not have, right? But it was an intention. It would have just been something like, yeah, I would like to, and nothing really happens off the back of it. It may not, right? On the other hand, what I did, I was committed to selling my car within like a 2-week window, because obviously I needed the money to get another car, whatever. And what I did was I went to the car wash, got my car cleaned, took some nice photos of it, uploaded it all to AutoTrader, filled in the information, wrote up a nice description, put a good price, competitive price compared to similar cars, similar age, similar mileage, etc. And lo and behold, within an hour or even 2 hours, I think it was, I had 2 phone calls from people who were interested. And one of those people I ended up selling the car to. And that's what I mean by having a clear system in place when it comes to like being committed to something. I was committed to selling my car, so I put a system in place that ensured that the best outcome would be that someone bought it for as close to the asking price as possible, which is pretty much what happened. Whereas if I was just willy-nilly with it, put a little sign in the window, like, it might not have happened, right? And an example of something in my life that's an intention is learning Italian. As much as it pains me to say that, like, it's really been an intention in my life, because I've always said at the beginning of the year, like, right, this is the year I'm going to learn Italian. I want to learn it. And I don't put a system in place that helps me create the outcome that I want. Like, I've got learning CDs, I've got family members I can speak to in Italian, I've got friends I can speak to in Italian, I can watch movies like with the subtitles on. There's so much stuff I can take lessons. There's so much stuff that I can do to learn Italian better. But I don't do it because I'm obviously not committed to it. So it's a clear intention because the idea is there, the want is there, but the commitment is not there because I don't create a system in place to ensure that I create the outcome that I want. And what I'm going to do differently next year, going into 2022, is to make sure that I'm more committed to that, to make sure I am committed, to make sure I put a system in place. I can listen to my Italian CDs maybe twice a week. I can maybe watch one Italian film with subtitles a week. I can maybe have a weekly or every other week conversation with one of my friends who lives in Italy and speak some Italian with them. Like, put a system in place that's going to aid in my learning, rather than it just being this wishy-washy kind of attention that might happen, might not happen. If I'm feeling it, I'll do it. If not, like, a system, a commitment happens regardless. Like, you get it done regardless, right? You get your work done at work because you go to work between certain hours. That's a system, right? Another example is like with like regular workouts. Like, people have an intention more often than not at the start of the year to like get a gym membership, and they think that's enough of a thing to help them start going to the gym. But a better system would be maybe to hire a PT once a week, so that you have somewhere to go, and you're committed to going to the gym at least once a week. You could meet with a friend on a Wednesday evening to go for a run or do a gym class. Like, that's a system that you're putting in place that allows you to create the outcome that you want. And here's the thing, right? Is that some people think that they have commitments, but they don't. What they actually have are intentions. And this is certainly been real for me around learning Italian. I've always thought like, yeah, I'm committed to learning it. But understanding it through this lens of like, what is the difference between a commitment and an intention? It's clearly been an intention for me. It's not been something that I've been really like committed to doing, because otherwise I would have learned more Italian by now and I'd be able to speak it a lot better than what I can, which is pretty much nothing for those who are asking. So a commitment is really about knowing what it is that you want, the outcome that you would like, and then putting a system in place that ensures that outcome, is met in some way. So like I said, with New Year's resolutions coming up and 2022 around the corner, we're halfway through January. No, we're not. We're halfway through December. It'd be weird if we were through January already, because we haven't had Christmas. We're halfway through December. And what I'd love to hear from you, if you're listening to this or watching this, is what is the commitment that you want to make next year, in the next 12 months? What are you committed to? Or, on the other hand, what is an intention that you have, like me learning Italian, that you want to turn into a commitment, right? To do that, just hit me up, Instagram at @IamAlexManzi, DM me with the thing that is a commitment that you're willing to make for the next 12 months, or an intention that you currently have, something that you want to do, you've tried to do, you have an intention around doing, but you've never created the outcome that you want, that you would like to become a commitment. Drop me a message and let me know. And the third thing that I wanted to share with you guys was actually one of the biggest things that I got out of the immersion, which is around me, for me personally, around judgment and the conflict that I create within myself around judgment. And what I mean by that is, like, I noticed that and this sort of happened in a conversation with my coach Sachin before the immersion. Like, we had a conversation around judgment and what I wanted to get out of the immersion. And I noticed that what came up for me was there's a lot of judgment that I place on myself. A lot of judgment around how I should or shouldn't do certain things or show up in certain situations. And then I beat myself up based on that judgment and make myself feel even worse about it. So the specific, I won't go into proper specifics, but the situation that I was referring to with the judgment stuff was like, when it comes to like my personal relationships with like my family and close friends, is like, I've always felt that I show up differently to how I show up for you guys on the podcast, or how I show up with my coaching clients, or how I show up with like my girlfriend or like other friends. And I would judge myself on that. And I would, and through doing that, what I was doing was I was just creating a conflict around the judgment, right? So I was keeping the judgment alive by being conflicted around how I felt about it, right? So on one hand, I felt bad about not showing up and being like completely present sometimes with my friends and family. But then behind that, I was judging myself for it. And then on top of that, I felt conflicted about the fact that I was judging myself for it. So just keeping myself in this cycle of like negativity and judgment. And what I realized is that the judgment that I'm putting on myself, and the reason that I'm creating a conflict, is because I want a different outcome to what there is, right? I want the situation that is happening to be different to what is, right? And that straight away creates a conflict, because it's creating a divide between what is and what I would like. So there's a conflict. And what I realized is that when that conflict's not there, when I could see through that conflict and that judgment and saw how I could drop it, what I realized, what is left behind, is the peace that I'm trying to actually reach. And I wrote something down that I want to read to you guys, which says, when there is peace, there is no conflict. The conflict exists in the search for peace, not realizing that the peace is there when there is no conflict. So I'm going to read that to you again. When there is peace, there is no conflict. The conflict exists in the search for peace, not realizing that the peace is there when there is no conflict. And what really came to me in that moment, and I wrote it down, is that I'm trying to search for peace in this situation around the judgment I have on myself by judging myself further, which, you know, when you say it out loud, it just sounds ridiculous, right? I judge myself further to create peace around the judgment that I have. Like, it doesn't make sense, right? It's just more thought. It's more keeping myself in that negative feeling state. It's keeping myself in that conflict, right? So the conflict that I'm creating because I'm thinking that it's going to bring me peace around that thing, but it's not, because the peace is already there, right? So when you drop the conflict, when you drop the judgment, what's left is peace, is being at peace with what is. And it's like, if you stop caring, like for me, if I stop caring so much around the conflict that I have within myself around why I don't show up presently, or why I'm not so open around, like, you know, certain members of my family or whatever, then the conflict ends. Because when there is no conflict, there is only peace. And I think that's a really beautiful thing, because there's so many areas of our lives, and I know it's true for me in my life, where I've created conflict around wanting it to be different to what it is, which is just keeping me further away from the peace that I actually want to feel around that situation. Whereas when I stop caring so much around about the conflict, and I stop giving the conflict so much attention, what I return to is peace, because the peace is always present. It's the conflict that we put to cover over the peace that is what we experience, right? Through our thinking, through our feeling. But the peace is the thing that's always present. And I think that's really powerful, because if you can recognize that the peace is the thing that's actually always present, and it's just the thinking that we have that creates the conflict, you can see that actually I don't need to listen to this thinking, because the thing that I want is already present in me. And it's like this quote that I heard that says, happiness is being at peace with what is ever on your mind. And I think that's a really powerful quote, because it's like saying, no matter what the situation is, no matter what you're thinking, be at peace with that. Because when there's peace, there is no conflict. And when there's conflict, there cannot be peace. So I hope that there's been some stuff in this episode that's really resonated with you. As I said at the start, I would love for you to hit me up. I'd love to hear the one thing that's really resonated with you from this episode. To do so, hit me up on Instagram at IamAlexManzi. Shoot me a DM with that one thing that you've learned from this episode, or the key takeaway that you've taken from this episode that is that resonates with you. Not from what I've said, but the thing that really resonates with you. Because I really want to build those conversations with you. I really want to see how I can further help you, how I can take that learning further for you, how I can help you with that. So please do hit me up on Instagram at IamAlexManzi with your learning. And if there's someone that you know that you think is going to really benefit from hearing this episode, then send it to them. Send them the screenshot, send them the link, because it's really important that we continue to spread the positive vibes and messages of episodes like this. You know, the more that you guys share these episodes with people you know, the more the community around the podcast grows, and the more people that we're getting to help. You know, I started this podcast because I wanted to create a positive change in people, and you can be a part of that by sharing this with someone that you know today.